honestly, I believe that women should be both special, like, during Women's Appreciation Month, but they should also be normal. So when a guest or an ensemble chooses to only program women during 1 month, I have a problem with that. Again, special, but also a part of the canon and also normal.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the great fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and leaders in the band community. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for listening. I really appreciate your time, and I hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you know one or two people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Everything Band is sponsored by Celtic Horizon Arts, the leading tour operator for the arts in the United Kingdom and Ireland. Celtic Horizon Arts hosts bands, orchestras, and choirs from around the world, and they are now taking inquiries for their 2020 Band Festival in Limerick, Ireland. This festival, featuring composer Johann de May, will include clinics, masterclasses, and cultural exchanges. Bands and individual musicians are all welcome to participate and can find out more by contacting Keith Kelly at keith@CelticHorizonTours.com or find out more on Facebook at Celtic Horizon Arts. Now, onto the episode and this week's guest, Sara Corry. Hi, Sara.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm doing pretty well, thank you. How about yourself?
I'm doing well on a Saturday morning, the couple days before Memorial Day. So, Sara, can you introduce yourself and tell the listeners who you are and what you're doing?
Hi, my name is Sara Corry. And currently I am an arranger with the United States Army Band Pershing Zone. I'm also a composer.
So Sara, now you are the arranger for the Pershing Zone. And now when people think of that, they might, especially my listeners who are in the band community, they might think of that as being the concert band, but the Pershing Zone actually encompasses many more ensembles. Can you just briefly run through the types of things you arrange for?
Pershing Zone has a bunch of different ensembles that provide musical support for the leadership of the United States and, branches of government and a wide spectrum for a wide spectrum of national and international events in support of soldiers and their families and public diplomacy. So we have a multitude of different ensembles, and I've arranged for actually a lot of them. And so you guys are familiar with the U.S. Army Concert Band. We also have the U.S. Army Band Downrange, which does pop, and it's kind of like our popular music ensemble. We have the U.S. Army Strings, which provides support to, the White House and a bunch of other different areas as well. We have the U.S. Army Herald Trumpets. They play for the inauguration and at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. They play really all over the place. And, there's only one Herald Trumpet ensemble in the United States. I mean, there might be more, but it's a very, very spectacular and unique ensemble. We also have a U.S. Army Woodwind Quintet. We have the U.S. Army Voices, which has 8 singers. It's SSAATTBB. They do a lot of stuff. They do chorus stuff. They also do popular music. They've done a couple popular tunes with the concert band. I think I mentioned I don't know if I mentioned our ceremonial band, but they play for our fallen soldiers and provide support to their families. And we also have a U.S. Army Brass Quintet, which is awesome. And the U.S. Army Blues, who play all of our wonderful, very, very complex jazz charts.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's a lot of stuff you have to deal with.
It is a lot. It's a wide variety of expertise and things to arrange for sure.
And so what are the challenges for you as an arranger and a composer with so many different ensembles to deal with?
It keeps things very interesting. I love it. So sometimes we get to write for, pop or jazz. And then sometimes our herald trumpet ensemble, which is the fanfare band for the president, we get to write stuff for herald trumpets. And before I came in, I had never really written for a herald trumpet ensemble before, because I believe there might be only one other ensemble in the United States that plays these particular instruments. So it definitely keeps you on your toes. You get to learn a lot.
Yeah, I bet. And so we're going to talk about your musical origins in a minute. But as I was looking at your background, you have a doctorate in composition. You have some electronic music. I listen to some of your music. It's wonderful. But it's not evident, at least it's not evident on the surface, about where you gained those skills to do all of these different things. I was wondering if maybe you can talk about that particular aspect of it.
I think I have a very varied background. In my doctorate, I did study a lot of electronic music, so that's kind of where that comes from. And generally, I guess I draw inspiration away from the musical field. I got an undergraduate degree also in science, so a lot of my career has been kind of spent blending different fields together. Like collaboratively and other ways. I did a dissertation piece in a black box theater with multiple projectors and dance and music and all of that kind of stuff. So again, my background is very...
Let's get into that a little bit. So can you tell everyone your origin story, how you got into music?
Yeah, so I was young, obviously most of us are, and the school makes you choose an instrument, and my parents asked me what instrument I wanted to play, and we didn't have a band program, so we only had a string program. And so, you got to choose from violin, viola, cello, or bass. And my parents were like, okay, what would you like to play? And I was like, the bass. It's the biggest instrument. I want that. And they said no. So I was like, what about the cello? It's the second biggest instrument. They said no. Viola, no. We have a violin in the closet. You'll play that. And about the same time, my parents required us to play piano as well for about 3 years before choosing an instrument that we wanted to play. So I put in a lot of work. I got very good at it. And my teacher was like, you know what? She's being a little brat. You might want to put her on an instrument she really likes. She's really good at this. And my parents were like, okay, she's doing well enough. We'll think of something. And so they finally asked me, they're like, so if you got to choose any instrument, what instrument would you want to play? And I was like, well, what's bigger than a bass? And I was like, the harp is bigger than a bass. I want to play that. So my parents rented me a harp in the next couple weeks. They brought it to the house. I figured out all my piano music on it, and they were upstairs on the banister staring down at me playing, and they kind of shook their heads. They're like, oh, bugger. Now we have to buy one of these things. So that's how I came to play the harp. I played harp and violin probably concurrently for about 18, 20 years, and then became just a professional harpist. Cool.
That's not an instrument that we run across on the Everything Band podcast, at least not very often.
Mm-hmm.
But
no, I loved playing. So I played with wind ensembles and orchestras all up and down the coastline of California, and it was one of the highlights of my life.
Oh, I bet. So where'd you grow up?
I grew up in California, so the southern area, just halfway between LA and San Diego.
Uh-huh. Oh, wow. Nice down there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. Nice weather, endless summer.
Absolutely. I spent 10 years in California. I graduated from high school in Salinas, and that's actually where I taught high school when I taught.
Oh, that's awesome. I graduated from San Clemente, so.
Do you remember the teachers as a high school student or as a middle school student? And do you remember some things that stood out about their teaching that maybe helped you become a musician or a professional?
I do. There were two instructors. My middle school band and orchestra director was really influential on me. Her name was Sherry Grossman. She gave me a lot of opportunities in the orchestra to develop my skill and really believed in us as musicians. And she opened art class every day. And this is kind of unusual for a middle school teacher. And it was a great trick I learned later on in teaching, to have music playing while you come in the room. So students have to sit down, be quiet, and listen, and then answer some questions about like the history of the piece, and listen and like various thoughts about the piece. So we span, middle ages music all the way up to 20th century modern stuff in that class. And it was really a wonderful experience, getting to reflect on that. I think I stole one of her Brahms CDs. I don't think she knows that. Maybe she'll listen to this and then get on to me. But she did that. And she also taught us music theory in middle school. So the really nice thing is once I got to college and did my undergrad test, I tested out of like all 4 years of theory, because I had already had that. I mean, in combination with other studies as well. But it was amazing that she did that. And then my high school actually didn't really utilize me as a harpist. So I joined a alternative kind of orchestra, like a youth orchestra outside. So I played for the Pacific Symphony Youth Orchestra, which was fantastic. And then I also played with the Four Seasons Youth Orchestra. And in the Four Seasons Youth Orchestra, they're a youth orchestra out of Southern California. And Roger Hickman, he teaches at Cal State University Long Beach. He conducted Four Seasons Youth Orchestra for a long time. And he was very prominent in my development as well as a musician. He let me play harp all over. I played harp, violin, and viola actually for those orchestras and for some of their subset and chamber ensembles. And I actually got to teach with them once I became old enough again. So those two people, Roger Hickman and I think Sherry Grossman, were two very influential people on me as a young musician.
So the harp is such a daunting instrument for those of us who are not performers on the instrument or that familiar with it. And so I know that every now and then there's in the band repertoire, there are pieces that call for harp. Do you have any recommendations if there's a director out there who's listening who runs across one of these pieces and maybe needs to hire someone in? What are they looking for that? Just a little bit of practical advice.
Yeah, the harp world is small. Finding harpists is sometimes challenging. You can put out the call to teachers in the area. The American Harp Society, I would take a look there. They have probably a directory of teachers, and they might be able to refer you guys to some students that maybe need that opportunity to play with a wind ensemble. I only got to play with a few wind ensembles in California as a young student, and honestly, that was some of the most fun music I had ever played, and I really loved it. Unfortunately, my high school didn't really play with them much, so I said, well, if you guys won't use me, then I'm going to contact every single other high school band and orchestra up the coastline of California, and I'll play for them instead. So I did. So
it sounds like you had some tremendous teachers who definitely started you thinking about music in a broader sense than just a performer or just as a teacher. And so I want to ask you about that. One of the things that we know that's a problem in the composition world is that there's not enough opportunity for young women composers, or maybe not enough opportunity for young girls to see women composers. And so what's the key element? When did you decide that I want to be a composer? I want to write music?
Okay. So I guess when I was younger, my parents actually knew that I was going to be a composer, I think, before I did. I think I was a little too logical about the whole, what are you going to do with your life? So when I was young, actually, before I started playing music, I heard a lot of music in my head. I would hear things on the radio and then change it. When I started piano, I didn't really want to play what was on the page. I just wanted to sit down, noodle around, and play things that I thought sounded cooler than what they had me playing. And so my parents were like, why do you hear music in your head? That's kind of weird. And so they're like, well, let's go to the doctor. Maybe the doctor knows. Maybe she's sick or something. So they took me, very, very tiny, to professional. And they were like, well, I think this is a gift. Maybe you should try her on Finale or one of these music notation softwares, so she can kind of get, the music out of her head and see where that goes. And so I had been composing kind of alongside all of this. And when I was in high school, I ran I was president of the orchestra. So I did write-ups on all the composers every week. And I always noticed, I was like, well, they're all guys. Why can't I find any female composers? So this is kind of strange. Or any composers of color or anything like that. Even though I tried, and this was back in the day, and the internet was kind of a thing, but not completely a thing. And so finding these resources was kind of difficult, going to the library and the Rolodex, trying to look it up, and our library didn't have anything. So I guess my parents thought, they're like, well, she composes all the time. This is what she really loves doing. So my parents thought I would be a composer before I did. I thought I would be a chemist. Go figure, right? And so I got to college, and I was doing a double major in science and music at the time. And then it became more apparent as time went on that I was actually a triple major. I was music performance, music composition, and science. And that kind of music composition was where my true love was. So I was like, okay. So I guess I kind of like stopped playing as much. I'll play new music all the time. I come out of retirement to play, stuff by living composers. And so I guess, sorry, meandering a little bit. I decided I'd be a composer, I guess, in college completely. So, and then I pursued a master's degree in just composition. And then in my master's degree, I noticed that I could use some of my science background with my music technology, like with my music background. And I kind of went into that world of music technology. And I loved every minute of it. So I kind of pursued that also as I'm also acoustic composer for sure. But I love the electronic element and like blending my science degree and my music degree together.
Have you done much writing for winds?
Yeah, I do a lot of arranging for band.
And so can you give us an example of a project that you've done recently?
Yeah, so I arranged a very large medley for concert band for The Greatest Showman. It's actually for 8 singers and full concert band. I'm also working on an arrangement of a medley for Hamilton as well for 8 singers and concert band.
So how does that come down? I know how it works in the private sector. So how does that work for you? You're employed by the United States Army. And so what happens? Someone approaches you with a project and says, we want to do this, or do you have much input into that?
The event kind of dictates what needs to happen. So our officers will decide what's best and let us know.
How much lead time do you get, and how much time do you have to do these things?
The process is fairly involved. In the civilian world, I normally get about 6 months, maybe a year. And I guess in the military side of things move at a very fast pace. So quite a bit less time.
Do you find much time to do writing on your own outside of your military stuff?
Not too much, but I do take on outside projects. It's just a lot of work. So
yeah, absolutely. Has the Army asked you to do anything original yet?
Yeah, I actually ended up writing a march for one of the commands. So I wrote them a piece, which was really a wonderful experience. And I think they're recording it soon. So I'm excited to hear.
Absolutely. Yeah. What's the title of the march?
Recruit the Brave. What
can teachers do to help more young women become composers? I mean, like, what sort of tools and lessons and can teachers give to kids?
That's actually a really great question. So Rob Deemer has started a database that has pieces by women composers, either locally or in different areas. You can search a bunch of different ways, but a lot of people just aren't really familiar with the music by women composers. And so, and you're like, where are we going with this? Well, one of the reasons why I didn't feel like I was encouraged to be a composer as a young kid was because I never saw anything by anybody that was female. So, like even in my history lessons as a kid, like when I went through, so I heard no female composers when I was in middle school, none when I was in high school. When I got to college, there were 5 in the Norton Anthology in the first book in the edition that I was taught. There are 5.
Wow, really?
Yeah, I think that's even giving them too much credit. I think it was Barbara Strossi, Hildegard von Bingen, Amy Beach, Ellen Tefts-Zwilich, and gosh, am I blanking on the 5th one? One of them was a performer composer. Clara Schumann, obviously. Yeah. And those are the 5 in the Norton Anthology. 5 out of I think it's like 1,300 composers that are mentioned in that book, probably more. There are 5. And so even as an undergrad, when I was majoring in composition, I felt not quite encouraged just because of how the canon is. And really, ignorance is no longer an excuse anymore. You can't just be like, well, I just don't know any because, we're not taught any. We need to kind of fix that mindset. And I feel like exposing younger musicians to female composers is probably the most encouraging thing an educator can do nowadays. You can also, if you can find them around, commission an ensemble, like say if you have a middle school band or something like that, commission someone to do something, have them come in and actually meet the composer. Like meeting the composer's events, I'm a big fan of. And then also like, actually getting that literature and actually like playing it for the kids so that they know and they feel encouraged. They're like, yeah, I don't feel discouraged. And it's really not that, it's not something you you think about. It's more like a subtle thing. So underneath the surface. So like because your brain is basically taking in all this information, and then at the end of the day, you're like, well, like it might not be a conscious thought. Oh, well, I haven't seen any female composers. You might be a little young. You might not be thinking like that right on the forefront of your brain, but you're like, oh, well, they're mostly guys, so I'm just going to let them do that and not participate. So it's encouraging people to write, like encouraging young women to write music, playing the music of women, and maybe potentially having meet and greet stuff in there. And I will say Rob Deemer, I guess, has a website up now where you can search for those things based on your location. You can search for the music based on type. It's a really beautiful functional thing. So
absolutely. There's another one by Christian Michael Folk that is just dedicated to female composers of band music.
Oh yeah. Okay. There you go.
So Sara, this idea of being a teacher and being a composer and also a role model. So what was it like? What kind of reactions were you getting from people when you sort of said, I'm getting my doctorate and now I'm going to go join the Army to be the arranger for the Pershing Zone? What sort of reactions do you get, both good and bad?
I think people were surprised. I think a lot of people who take the doctoral route for music composition go straight into professorships. And so I think people were surprised when they were and asked me, like, do you want to do this? And I said, yeah, actually, my background has really prepared me for something like this. I've had military in my family on my mom and my dad's side. And one thing I really wish that young people in the music world would realize is that being a well-rounded person is really, really an advantage. That way you get to hone a lot of different skills. I'm not just a composer. I also like to hike mountains. I also like to bike. I also pursue pretty avidly scuba diving. I taught under a dive instructor at CU Boulder. So at CU Boulder, I taught Introduction to Electronic Music and also scuba diving. And, those two things are very, very different. I had one student, only one in my history, the 5 years that I was there, take both electronic music and scuba diving. He pulled up in the pool and put on a suit and was like, oh my gosh, Professor Corry, why are you in the pool? So, I mean, having all that well-rounded and all those different experiences really kind of cemented my integration into the Army. With my love of hiking and with my love of the outdoors and all of those kind of odd experiences that I love, I found a job that combines all of them together. And I think that's pretty awesome.
Let's talk about your process for writing. And I know that we talked about how these projects come kind of fast and they come on you and you're sort of given the set of parameters. What's your process when you start a project? And it can be for the Army or just for yourself. What does your process look like as a composer?
Well, the first thing that I try to do is try to get a solid vision of what the piece, like what role the piece needs to fulfill. So say someone's commissioning like a band work or an orchestra work from me. Like where is it going to be played? What's its use? Like, what's your vision for it? What's my vision for it? And I like to kind of just make sure we're on the same page. So if someone's like, oh, write me a piece. And I'm like, okay, here's a piece for, I don't know, flute and electronics. And they're like, well, I was really feeling like a string quartet. So we don't have any, miscommunications about that. So it's kind of just, getting on the same page, with the vision. And then, if there are any like constraints that need to happen based on the ensemble. So say it's a grade 3 piece or it's an educational piece. That's kind of stuff that I need to take in consideration too, just to know the difficulty of what I'm able to write for. And then, contracts and stuff are normally drawn up. So to get all that, in writing and official.
So Sara, let's say that there's someone listening out there who goes, oh, that's so cool. She sounds awesome. maybe I'll commission her to write a piece for my middle school band. Is that something that you're available to do?
Yeah, of course that's something I'm available to do. I actually love, because I had such a positive experience in my middle school. I love writing for younger and educational ensembles. But what I did grow up in the orchestra world, which was a little different. I always felt like the band had the cool music.
Isn't that funny that you would say that?
I know. I know it is pretty bizarre, but we were always playing like dubbed down versions of Bach or dubbed down versions of Handel. Occasionally, we could play something that was that advanced, but it was normally Baroque or like very classical music that everyone would hear. I think we played one piece by Richard Meyer, who was a contemporary, string education music composer. And I remember that very clearly in middle school. And I was like, wow, we get to play something cool like the band does. I'm not sure that everyone feels that way. I don't get me wrong. I love myself some Mozart, some Bach and Beethoven and the good old classics. But I was very excited to play something new.
That's interesting. Sure. Because, the band world is really funny because it's true. The band world embraces new music and new composers. But it's also, there's a part of the band world that does lots of transcriptions of these pieces that are orchestral works and war horses to expose kids to these great pieces from the canon. And so it's interesting that you would say that as a kid growing up in the orchestra, saying that the band had all the cool music.
Yep, they did. They had all the cool music. We always, sometimes I felt like we were kind of second to the band, the orchestra, a lot with the music and all the events they get to play for. I loved the band world. So when I started playing harp and they were like, oh, we actually need the harp in the band on occasion, I was like, yes, this is awesome.
Yeah, the band, and in many schools, of course, the band is the public face.
It is, and it's not that I didn't love the orchestra. I loved playing Tchaikovsky and playing all of that really beautiful string literature. I just wish that at a young age we could have had played some stuff by some living composers.
So this is interesting because now I think of an overlap with what you're doing now. And so a lot of what you're doing is very utilitarian. And so there's this, I guess maybe what I'm thinking is maybe it's built into us as composers when we're pursuing academic degrees and, we're looking to be innovative and new. And, educational music is utilitarian music, much like some of the arrangements you must be doing. And I'm just making assumptions. Do you think that might be the thing?
No, I don't necessarily think it's utilitarian. I think it can be very innovative. Just even defining what new is or innovative is a little difficult because we're an amalgamation of everything that we've had so far. Like if you wanted to find a jazz, hip hop, new early music, like medieval music blend of something, you could find it out there. And is that exactly, what do you call that, innovative? Or
I think it's pretty innovative.
Yeah, I guess so, but it's already there and people do that. So right now we're kind of in this world where we have all of these extended techniques, we have all of this stuff, but I think where innovation is coming in is really like the blending of multiple genres. Mm-hmm. And that's present everywhere. You can do that in a lot of different ways. So I don't think what I'm doing is utilitarian or, educational music is utilitarian. It can be innovative.
Yeah.
And then it just depends on like how you define innovative.
I'd like to take a short break from our episode to invite you to listen to my music at markjconner.com. I am always seeking opportunities for collaboration. If you are interested in commissioning a new piece of music for me, having me work with your students in person or via Skype, or to just say hello, please drop me a line at markjconner@gmail.com or through the contact form on my website. All right, so Sara, thanks so much for everything so far. Where do you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy competition in music?
That's a really interesting question, Mark. I do believe there's healthy and unhealthy competition. I think in our American culture, we generally accept competitiveness as like an ethic. It's kind of ingrained in our culture to be competitive, but I don't think it should ever, cut people down or get into kind of unhealthy habits. I also think that's one of the reasons I went to I didn't go to a conservatory. I went to a university where people were collaborative and supportive to to get to your musical goals instead of kind of cutthroat and, I will try to undermine the person who's like one chair ahead of me type mentality. I just, that doesn't have any place in my life.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's interesting. Music tends to be more collaborative. I don't really run across too many hyper-competitive musicians, but in the band world, in the music education community, we see marching band contests, concert band contests, where often they're judged and graded, and so that can be a little bit of a lightning rod in the community.
That's true. I can see that. Again, it kind of comes down to like individual improvement. So I guess it's more of like a mindset philosophy. So yeah, you might go to a competition where you're graded like a 3 out of a 5. And that should be not that the band next to you is better, like they got a 5, but taking in those judges' comments and being like, yeah, our intonation is not great here. We should really work on that. So it's really competing against the best version of yourself than it is competing against others.
Absolutely. You touched on it a little bit earlier in the interview, but let me ask you formally, how do you achieve a work-life balance as a musician?
Okay. So I think a lot of people work kind of like long, hard hours at jobs they hate to buy things they don't need to impress people they don't like. And I try not to do that. You really just need to kind of set and enforce boundaries in your life. Because if you don't design your own life, someone else will do it for you. Either your job, your family, something will happen. And so it's kind of just deciding what you want out of life. And I've kind of preferred to have like a life well lived versus a life that strives for accolades or money. And I think that's, allowed me to develop a lot of different interests. And at the end of the day, if I'm happy with it, then I guess that's the best thing. So, I mean, achieving work-life balance is also, a difficult thing. And it also depends on how you define work and how you define balance and life and what you need out of those things.
Sure. I like the idea of designing your own life. That's a nice way of putting it. Nice turn of phrase.
Yeah, well, thank you.
So the next question is really for the teachers in the listening audience. And so as you see it, what are the challenges facing music education? And if you want to talk about maybe music in general, we can talk about the larger picture as well.
I think that there's a lot of positive things really in the band and the education world. I think there's a lot of good music coming out for it. I think that one challenge, that I see, and this might be maybe a different view, but I think a lot of times a piece will hit the band world and then everyone wants to commission a composer to basically write that piece, but the 2.0 version of that piece. So it's kind of getting out of that kind of mind frame, I guess. So as a composer, sometimes people will commission me to write a piece and then they'll be like, oh, I love that piece so much. I want you to write that piece again, but just a little different. And so I think that when approaching composers and, commissioning pieces in particular for band, have an idea of what you want to hear, but also, reinventing, taking the wheel and, now it's a wheel, but it's pink, and now it's a wheel, but it's blue, branching out into other shapes is cool too. I don't know if that's exactly what you were looking for, but
no, I think that's fine. I know one of the criticisms much band music gets is that a lot of it does sound the same.
Oh yeah. I think there's so many different shades and colors. It's not that it sounds the same. It's that, it's people approaching you for the same piece, but a different version of the same piece.
Right. And that happens all the time, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And that may be what people want. So you respect that as a composer, if that's what they really want. Try to encourage them, as you said, to think beyond that, though. Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes there's certain components of those pieces that you do like. So say you like the rhythmic drive in a John Mackey piece, then you can say, oh yeah, I really like that kind of energy or that kind of drive. I want something with that instead of, being like, oh, I just want this one piece and do it again.
Right.
Right. So.
Well, as a composer too, sometimes I find myself writing the last piece as I'm trying to write the new piece. Do you ever find that? I'm doing that right now.
That's hilarious. I mean, sometimes it happens. I find myself falling back on similar techniques, but normally the different types of instruments I've been asked to write for are so diverse that it's almost impossible. Artificial harmonic trills on strings, and then I'm doing that for electronic, like that with electronics, and then the next piece is like a classical woodwind quintet. Like some of those things, I mean, sometimes it does translate, but sometimes I feel like the mediums that I write for, like one after the other are so different. It's a real nice brain palette cleanser for me to be like, okay, that was one thing. It's now compartmentalized in a different box. Now on to the new thing.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, actually. It kind of forces you to be diverse just because every assignment's a little different. That's cool.
Oh, yeah. I mean, extremely different most of the time.
What advice would you give your younger self, maybe the Sarah who's looking across the dais at her high school graduation?
I guess I would tell myself that nothing in this world is really fixed and permanent. And that sounds kind of like a double-edged sword per se, I guess, giving, a young person that kind of advice, I guess. Existence is in flux, and you're always in a state of becoming. So I think that's really what it is. You're always in a state of becoming. So I feel like the mindset I had as a kid was like, I will do XYZ and then I will get XYZ. And, and maybe I'll be happy once I achieve XYZ. And that's kind of a very like fixed mindset to have. And if you kind of believe you're always in a state of continuous becoming, it kind of makes life a lot more enjoyable instead of being like, I'll be happy once I get this instrument, or, I'll be happy once I get the job, or once I finish my doctorate, or once I finish my master's degree, or like, you're always in a state of becoming. Like once those landmarks happen, you're still continuing.
If you could plan it out, what would the final work be that you'd engage with, either conducting or listening to or programming in some way? So
Schnittke's piano quintet, that fifth movement speaks to me a lot. It's got this kind of ethereal piano, beautiful background going on with this kind of chaos over the top. It's got beautiful, historically, it's got a beautiful story, and I'd encourage anyone who hasn't listened to it to go take a listen and listen to the story behind the piece. That's one of them. Another beautiful piece that I do very personally enjoy is an Estonian composer, Pärt's Cantus in memory of Benjamin Britten. Again, it's not a band piece; it's a string piece, but the story behind it is very beautiful, and as is the music. It's a very churning, and a lot of people probably listen to it and say, "Oh, this is like a process." But I mean, there is a beauty in that process. I mean, if you want to talk about war horses that are good, I mean, And the Mountains Rising Nowhere is great. Schwantner's.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That hasn't been mentioned on this podcast. Yeah, no.
Okay, no. I mean, that's a great one that I really do enjoy. So I guess there's a smattering, but I feel bad because there's so many pieces out there, but right now that are fabulous that I'm pretty sure like once I hang up the microphone, I'll be like, oh my God, why didn't I do that one?
Of course. And The Mountains Rising Nowhere, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say the first time I heard And the Mountains Rising Nowhere, it was a live performance conducted by Alan McMurray at CU Boulder. That was back in 1994.
Oh, geez. That's awesome.
That piece has fallen out. I'm sorry. That piece has fallen out of fashion a little bit, I feel like. Or maybe there's just so much other great music. I mean, there's just so much stuff. So, yeah, there's also a great piece by Jennifer Jolley called "The Eyes of the World Are Upon You." That was written for the University of Texas Wind Ensemble, which was conducted by Jerry Junkin. I think it was probably last year, about 2017. But that's a wonderful piece. So if no one's heard that, I would definitely go check that out. All right, last question, and I'm going to put this kind of back in the beginning, and this is Memorial Day, and you're the staff arranger for the Pershing Zone Band. What does Memorial Day mean to you? It means a lot. So, like I said, I had family in the military on my dad's side. We had
we had Air Force, and on my mom's side we had Marines. I didn't really have anyone in my immediate family, but my when I took the audition for the opportunity to enlist and be a member of the United States Army, we had our audition on Fort Myer, which is Arlington National Cemetery, and it was actually a beautiful moment for me because my grandfather is actually buried there. He fought in 2 wars and was a colonel in the Air Force, and he was a very big and inspiring presence in my life, and very, very influential in my life. And it's a wonderful day that we use to honor the men and women who died serving the U.S. military, and we honor their sacrifice.
Yeah, it's probably our most important holiday, I think.
It is. It's really beautiful and very impactful.
Well, the military bands across the board are really important to our musical culture, and they're very important to the band world because lots of people in the band world look to the military bands as their cue. Unlike in the orchestral world, where you have where I am, the St. Louis Symphony or the New York Phil, and there aren't those kind of bands other than like the Marine Band or the Field Band or the Navy Band. So, Sara, thank you so much for the interview, and thank you for your service.
Thank you for having me on, Mark. I appreciate it.